And one of the hardest things for me was thinking, I am damaged goods, like top to bottom, inside and out, mental, physical, you name it. I checked all the boxes for damaged goods. No one will ever want me again. It's okay to feel what you feel. It's okay to something my mom told me. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be emotional about this. It's okay to feel what you feel. Just don't live there.
All right. Welcome to Survival Mode. It's the podcast, that I decided by Todd Angelucci. I wanted to really help impact and get some information out to the world, to the community. I'm a registered nurse slash health coach who faced a traumatic diagnosis of a brain tumor and, really wanted to share the experience and lessons learned through the journey. And people I've met along the way who have worked through challenges and are now helping other people, just sharing their story and learning to live life out loud without regrets. I've shared my struggles and some of the traumas and anxiety and all those things that I went through, and also kind of the lessons learned. And so this podcast is about working through what's holding people back, keeping them from living a happy, inspired life. You don't have to necessarily have had a traumatic experience, but I think what that does is gives a new insight. And I wish anybody and everybody to have an insight so they live their life happy, inspired, and moving forward. And we're not always happy. There's ups and downs for sure. So we help weed through the confusing information about health, healing, and transformation. And today I am super honored and blessed to have Mandi Chambless. She is an ovarian cancer survivor. And I have to say, I saw her on social media. I saw her story and I heard some of the things she was sharing and talking about. And I was super inspired because, through some of the ups and downs, has lived and is learning to live an inspired life. And she's here to share her story and kind of share anything that, kind of inspires her to help others in this world. So Mandi, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited. So you were diagnosed here at age 28 with ovarian cancer, stage
Correct.
3C. Is that what it's called? Right.
Yep, that's
And
right.
for those viewers or listeners out there who haven't heard of that, can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Yeah. So, um, s- ovarian cancer and most cancers are diagnosed or and kind of defined by stages. So, stage one ovarian cancer basically means that the cancer is defined and maintained in the ovary, so it has not spread. And then it kind of goes up from there to stage four. Within each one of those stages, you have an A, B, and a C. And in essence, each letter progression means that the cancer has progressed slightly more. So, stage three means that the cancer has metastasized to neighboring organs or maybe your abdominal wall. And it's also, as you go through stage three, A, B, and C, stage 3C, maybe B also. I honestly don't remember right now, but stage three, you definitely have metastases to the lymph nodes as well. So, stage 3C is the last level before you get to stage four ovarian cancer. Now, obviously, as the stages progress, life expectancy reduces. So for me, I was given about a 20% chance to live 5 years. And February 13th of 2022 will be 13 years. So I know, fist pump.
That
So
is a
I
fist bump for sure.
yes, I am thankful and blessed to be one of the ones here to tell my story. One of the hard things about ovarian cancer is that and some of you guys out there may have heard this before, but it's called the silent killer. And it's because a lot of the symptoms mimic other types of issues you may have, gastrointestinal or whatever. And so it progresses misdiagnosed sometimes for months and months. So it is very, very common for women to not be diagnosed until they are already progressed to stage 3, unfortunately. And because of that, and we can for sure talk about this and delve into this if you'd like, along the way, I've met a lot of friends, survivor friends, and I've lost a lot of survivor friends because of this as well. So it's kind of a heavy thing. You feel blessed and you feel guilt at the same time. But I'm very, very happy and awaiting February 13th. And I just continue to push through and find the light and the positivity and carry on. I don't think move on. I never say move on. I don't think we ever move on. I just define it as carrying on, you know? So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell. That's me now.
So let me ask you a question. So you're 28 years old. What brings you, because I know me at 28, I was like, whatever, I'm having fun, I'm traveling, I'm like, we're just, I'm with friends. I just graduated college. Actually, my son was just born. Like what brought you to here at 28 to this diagnosis? Like what led up to it? And tell me a little bit more about that.
Oh man. Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, actually a couple of things come to mind. What led me here to this stage of diagnosis was 100% misdiagnosis after misdiagnosis after misdiagnosis. And at that point in my life, I mean, I would like to think at 28, I had a good head on my shoulders. Baselines have moved, right? Because people, when I go to a doctor, they'll ask me, are you tired? Are you this? Are you that? And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to be at 41? And what would I look like / feel like had I not had the health history that I've had? So I don't have a baseline anymore for who and what and how all the things should have been. So that being said, at 28, I had just graduated with my doctorate in audiology, which nobody knows what that is. So I'll just tell you, it's a hearing and balance doctorate. So I just graduated from grad school 2 years prior to that, and had actually just been married for about 2 years as well, which is a story within itself. But I just started having some strange things that were happening. I was training for my first half marathon, and I kept gaining weight, and I was very thin, very healthy. I ate very healthy at the time. And I couldn't understand why my pants wouldn't zip anymore and why my lower back was aching. And I just, at that age, I didn't, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I knew about breast cancer. I knew about brain cancer and certain types of cancer, but cancer was cancer to me. Mm-hmm. I didn't understand the intricacies of what was going on. It never even crossed my mind. Now, all of that to say, I did pursue medical treatment, and I did continue to go to, I believe it was 4 different doctors, and they misdiagnosed me. And thankfully, I did not listen to them, or you and I would not be having this conversation right now. So there was something within me that told me this is not right. But lack of understanding, I'm assuming just education on cancer and awareness in general, and just being just plain young and thinking you're invincible. And certainly that would never happen to you. Definitely progressed this misdiagnosis process for sure. So to explain this a little bit more in terms of how I felt and where I was when I was diagnosed, I woke up in a recovery room with the nurse dictating over me. And she said, 28-year-old female malignant neoplastic ovary. That's how I found out I had cancer. So it wasn't like this is so-and-so's doctor's office. We need you to come in so we can talk to you about your results type thing. I mean, that's clearly, most certainly a red flag. So I would have had a little bit more of a heads up, I think, had that happened. But the final doctor that I went to that ended up being my oncologist finally did an ultrasound. There's a mass. It's the size of a cantaloupe. It's moving, so we're not too terribly concerned about it. It's not cancer because it's mobile, but we do want to get it out as soon as possible. But there's no rush. And I'm like, okay, well, what are you doing tomorrow?
Did you say size of a cantaloupe?
Size of a cantaloupe, yeah.
So a cantaloupe's like this. It's like almost like the size of my head, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Hence the lower back pain.
And hence your pants getting bigger, right?
Exactly. But the strange thing is, and I'm thinking now, did I ever like actually try and feel for something? And the answer is probably no, because what was I feeling for? I had no expectations of anything foreign being there. So I wasn't poking and prodding around. I just knew something wasn't right. So I didn't know. I just didn't know. And so he finds this thing. I schedule surgery as quickly as possible because if there's something in there that's not supposed to be in there, it's got to go like quickly. And so I went into surgery more nervous about the IV needle, to be completely honest with you. I just thought, well, one and done, let's just get this over with. And I don't like IVs, but it's going to be fine. And I was like sweating that IV. And yeah, so I woke up in the recovery room. The first time I woke up was for a split second, and I saw the clock on the wall. And it said, I believe it was 11:24. I'd have to go back and look at my notes right now. But my surgery started at 7 a.m. and they said, oh, it's about an hour tops. No big deal, in and out. And so when I saw 11:24 on the digital clock, I thought, well, that's not a good sign. And then I was out again. And then the next time I woke up was when the nurse was dictating. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, she's talking about me. And then I was asleep again. And then X number of minutes, seconds, hours, your guess is as good as mine, later, I woke up and I could tell I was being wheeled down a hallway and I could hear crying. And I opened my eyes and my mom and my dad and my brother were leaning over me and their tears were falling on me. And they were patting my head and they kept saying, this is going to be okay. We're going to get through this. We're going to get through this. And I looked at my dad and I said, Daddy, they took everything, didn't they? And he said, yes, baby, they did. And I said, I have cancer, don't I? And he said, yes, baby, you do. And in the waiting room prior to that, they had been, obviously shell shocked, like that goes without saying. The doctor had to stop my surgery and go out and tell them what was going on. So amongst the trauma and the shock and so on, they were trying to figure out, how do we tell her? And thankfully they didn't have to, because I just already knew. And so, I think when it comes to cancer diagnoses, that mine's a little extreme in terms of surprise. Your world is being turned upside down in terms of the way that I found out. But it was, what's better though, being prepared or not being prepared? Having time to worry about it or just being hit with it and knowing that you have to just push forward. Who's to say? But that's my story in terms of how this all began.
So yeah, that's quite a story for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That is. So you saw doctors beforehand, right? Yeah. And they were just kind of like, oh, did they do like a vaginal exam? They didn't feel anything. They were just like, oh, it's not, how did it get to the, like, were a bunch of like, oh, it's probably nothing kind of things before you even got to that OR,
Yeah. So the first doctor I went to was my gynecologist in my hometown. And I had endometriosis for years. And so I just thought, oh, this is somehow related, right? Like your mind just doesn't go there. It's what's the saying? When you hear hoofbeats, you think horses, not zebras. So of course, I just thought, oh, this is just one and the same. It's the same thing that I've always dealt with. So I went to, even though I lived in Dallas at the time and could get what I call big city care, I went to my hometown, my small hometown. And yeah, they did all the things that you would expect them to do. They did physical exams and so on. They did not do any scans. They did not do an ultrasound. That was not done for 3 months. One thing that was done was, and I'm blanking on the name of it right now, potentially because it was so traumatizing. I'll probably just try to block it out of my memory altogether. But it was a test to assess for a bladder fistula. So a fistula is in essence a hole, right? So a hole between my bladder and my uterus, because I was having some things that were, appearing that were not normal, that should not be there. So they were thinking maybe there was a hole and my urine was seeping from my bladder down through my uterus. And so my doctor says, we're going to do this test for a fistula. Fistulas really only occur in third world countries with women who have been brutally raped. We're going to test you for it. And I'm like, we're doing that? Like, seriously, we're doing this right now? So anyway, that's how crazy things got. And so what they did is they put in a catheter, which was the most horrific experience of my life. And I've been through a lot, and this is the most painful part that I can recall, and filled my bladder up with blue dyed liquid. I don't know what it was. And put a tampon in and said, you have to wait an hour. You cannot pee. And what we're going to do is see if that blue liquid is on that tampon in an hour. So y'all, I cannot even, it is such a blessing just to pee whenever you want to pee. I have to tell you that, because after sitting for an hour, just literally tears streaming down my face in horrific pain. And then finally removing the tampon and saying, oh my gosh, I see a dot of blue. We figured it out. I don't know why I have this thing, but we figured it out. And she said, that's probably just some byproduct of, what was remaining on your body when you put the tampon in. That's not enough to say anything. And she said, so unfortunately, at this point, I have to tell you that this is just how you are. And I do not fault her. She was doing the best she could with the knowledge that she had. I was told multiple times, you don't have cancer, you're too young, you have no family history. I can't tell you how many times in my life I've been told that. And we forgive, we forget, and we move on. And again, thankfully, I'm one of the blessed ones that's still here to have the ability to forgive and forget and move on. But had I listened to this doctor, I would unequivocally not have survived more than a few years. And so when I was told this, I just have to tell you, this is how you are now, I moved on to a different doctor in Dallas, who led me to a different doctor, who led me to my current oncologist. So that is, in essence, the first major side effect that I had, besides, just some general low aching in my lower back and my pants not really fitting and everything, and just being a little tired. I remember being in the gym one day and saying, my gosh, has this instructor gotten just super mean, or am I just on the struggle bus? And so there were, but I could equate that to a million different things. It's so easy to write these symptoms off and ignore what's going on. Oh, it's stress, it's fatigue, it's this, it's that, it's whatever. But there was one symptom that I had that I knew was completely abnormal. And that's what she had tested me for, and still didn't come to the right conclusion. And so that led me to the oncologist that did the ultrasound and, the story that we just talked about a minute ago, and got it removed and found out, Shazam, when I woke up, nothing's ever going to be the same again.
So you wake up and, you heard the nurse say, malignant, a malignancy, and your parents are in shock and trauma and dealing with it, or trying to deal with it. What are you thinking? What's going on in your head? Like,
Well, through anesthesia, through that haze, not a whole lot, because I mean, at the cursory moments here at the beginning of this process, I was so out of it. I was so confused. I mean, I have a scar that's about a foot long running vertically up my abdomen. So I was filleted like a fish. I was thinking about pain.
Yeah.
How uncomfortable I was. Now, when I woke up and I saw my parents, I was out again immediately after that. For a split second after seeing them, I could hear people, like I could hear them wheeling me down the hallway, and I could hear people lining the halls that were crying. And I remember opening up my eyes and looking around, and I don't even know how many people were there, but my friends and family were lining both sides of the hallway as they wheeled me in. So they certainly had plenty of time to get a lot of people there before I even actually woke up. When I woke up and, in essence, kind of remained awake, I guess, so anesthesia was wearing off, I'm thinking about this. And I'm trying to put myself back there and think about the feelings. And the first thing that pops up in my mind when I think about laying in that bed and looking around the room was just don't scare them. Take care of them, put a smile on your face. And one thing I've said for 13 years that sticks with me, and in the book that I'm writing, I say it multiple times, it is so hard to be the reason everyone around you is trying not to cry. And the first time I realized that was that day, laying in that room with my friends and my family all staring at me, trying to, I don't know what even was going through their head. I don't even want to imagine it. The guilt of even trying to think about what they were thinking is too much for me to even process. But I can imagine that they were probably thinking the same thing as me. Don't let her see you cry. And I was thinking the same thing. Don't scare them any more than they're already afraid. Just be tough for them. So, and honestly, I didn't get my staging diagnosis. I didn't fully wrap my brain around and understand what was happening to me until it's probably about a month later. I had to start chemo 2 weeks after my surgery because it was like a 911 situation. We've got to get this going now. So I hadn't even healed from my surgery yet. And I started chemo, and I went to MD Anderson to get a second opinion. It was about a month or so after my surgery. And the doctor started explaining the staging process to me. So he's explaining, stage 1, 2, 3, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I don't remember exactly what I said, something to the extent of, well, you just said that I had it in my lymph nodes, right? He said, yes. And I said, but you said people that have it in their lymph nodes only have like a 20% chance of surviving. And he said, yeah. And I said, but I can't be that person. And he looked at me and he said, has no one explained your staging to you yet? And I said, no. And he said, Mandi, you have stage 3C ovarian cancer. You have a 20% chance of living 5 years. And I just remember staring at him, and he was very stoic. I mean, I can't imagine having their jobs. He does this multiple times a day. He sees death multiple times a day. And so, he had a decent enough bedside manner, but he was also quite stoic about it. And I understand he must have to separate himself from these situations. But he talked to my parents a bit. He put his hand on my shoulder, and as he walked out of the room, he said, I'm sorry. That was it.
They said that to me too. And it's part of my story because I'll never forget it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I'll never forget it. I've been on their side because I worked in the ICU as a nurse. I totally, like, what do you say? And I'm so mindful of it now because I remember when I went to the ER, because I didn't have symptoms that were crazy either. I just thought I worked too much. Mm-hmm. And when I got back to the ER bay after the brain scan, they said, you're not crazy. You got a marble-sized tumor in your head. And I'm like, what? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, it was like somebody just punched me in the gut. And I go, this sucks. And I was like, a little bit of tears. And then they said, I'm sorry. And I'll never forget that.
Sounds so finite.
It's like, and I don't know if you take it this way, but when somebody passes away, like, and you're like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. Like, it's like it happened already. Like, I don't know. It was just this weird, like, I'm on the receiving side of I'm sorry,
Yes. Yes. For a life-threatening circumstance. So
Right.
in my mind, what I hear you saying and what I'm taking from that and the way I felt about it is you're already marking me with an expiration date.
Right.
It's
Right.
finite. You're telling me, sorry, you're probably not going to survive this. It was rough.
Yeah.
And he was right, by the way. Let's not forget the fact that that is an accurate statement. I should not have survived this, but I did.
That is truly amazing. So he says he's sorry, right? You're focusing on just healing the primary, because you definitely, I had a couple weeks to think about things before my surgery, but you were there. You just thought you were getting some routine surgery, and then on the back end, and I understand, surgery, you're just like, hey, you're lucky, you're happy to have a bowel movement, eat something, move, all that stuff, right?
Yes.
So like, we like the basics, like, let me drink a sip of water, like,
One of the chapters in my book, I just have to tell you this because it's not all doom and gloom. The chapter about me leaving the hospital is called, at this moment anyway, Everybody Loves a Good Fart Story. And it's just about, they told me you have to pass gas to go. And who talks about this in daily life? Like, it's just not, but I was just like, come on, I got to fart. So I can go home. And it gets better from there, but
I got a funny story too, because in my nursing career, I always mention, that the elderly are always worried about their bowels when they're in the hospital, they're in the, so I was on steroids prior to surgery. And before, I had like 4 hours of staring at a wall before my case. I was like losing it in COVID land too. Right. So nobody could go in. I'm in a paper Johnny. I'm like, oh my God. And I'm all backed up and I'm like, I don't know what to do. So I'm telling the anesthesiology guy. So he goes, oh, don't worry about it. We'll be, they'll give you stuff, like, but I was all freaked out about it. So after my surgery, I had a catheter in, by the way, in my bladder, but I was blessed to have it put in while I was under anesthesia. Coming out is better than coming in and going in.
I had it put in and pulled out with not 1 ounce of drugs. Just disclaimer there. Worse, like I'm squeezing my legs just thinking about it. Carry on. Sorry.
And so they had brain surgery, like they cut your skull, that's clipped in, it's weird. And it just kind of felt odd. Yeah, and I had to go to the bathroom. So I get up and go to the bathroom, and there's like this thing, and I'm like, I'm a little bound up, and I'm like, I don't want to push hard. I don't want brains coming, like all this stuff, right? And all of a sudden, like I had to kind of force a little bit. I heard a squish. So I was like, I called the nurse, I'm done. I go, no, I heard a squish when I did this. And she goes, I've never heard of that before. And I'm like freaking out, right? So the surgical PA comes in like an hour later. I said, I had a squish. I hope he goes, oh, that happens all the time. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, you work in a neuro unit, you should know this. Like, I was all freaked out, like my brain was coming out, it's just that kind of weird stuff.
Unbelievable. That is a whole new level of story for me. I'll tell you, all modesty goes out the window, right?
It does.
Forget it. I would have been like, you're going to have to take this patch off real quick and make sure that like something's not leaking, that I'm not just like having a membrane just hanging off the side of my head now or something.
So I know. So tell me, so you're going through anything dramatic go on through the healing process prior, when you get out? Tell me a little bit about your story that starts to proceed here.
Yeah. So in terms of on the relationship side, to add insult to injury, I was married to someone at that point in time that was an addict and just wasn't strong enough to handle my circumstances. So about a week after I came home from the hospital, he was in essence kicked out of my house. Not by me, but thankfully it was done. I would have never done it myself. So when you talk about the healing process, the first thing that comes in mind to me is just the mental and emotional healing. And I do have to add that part into my story because that adds a whole other level of just crap, you know? And so I was dealing with being separated, and I was dealing with a life-threatening diagnosis. I was dealing with not really understanding my staging for a month, because before that, I just thought, oh, this is just something I have to do and it'll be fine. I'm just going to get this over with and move on. And that was certainly not the case. So I had what was called intraperitoneal chemo, which is in essence where you have a port inserted into your abdomen. So I have the port, I've got the port scar on my chest, but I also have one in my abdomen. And what they do with intraperitoneal chemo is they fill up your abdominal cavity with a liter of chemo, and you roll on one side to let it, it's like almost like a wash, I guess, or whatever. You roll on one side, and the hope is that it, soaks into any remaining chemo cells on that side. And then you roll onto the other side, same thing, stay there for, I don't know, 30 minutes or an hour. I don't remember what it was. And then lay on your back, and you just keep kind of flopping around like a fish. And then they did the other chemo. So I left with 2 liters of chemo in my abdomen. So in terms of when I think about the healing process, aside from the emotional and mental side, the physical side was challenging for me because intraperitoneal chemo is so brutal that they actually have stopped doing the regimen. It has not shown to prolong lifespan, and most women cannot make it through all of their chemo rounds because it is so horrific and terrible, and the side effects are just so incomprehensible. I had 6 rounds of chemo. My first one was IV because I didn't have my ports put in yet, so I did make it through all 5 of my IP rounds. And in terms of side effects from that, your general nausea and staying in bed for days at a time. And by the time I would start to feel better, it would be time to start the next round, and so on. And throughout all of this, my scars are healing. My physical scars are healing. So let's make a very clear differentiation between those. I'm still working on healing my mental and emotional scars, but my physical scars were healing. And I mean, I frankly, I think I'm thankful enough to say that there's nothing really noteworthy in terms of my physical healing process and my chemo throughout the 6 months that I was doing my regimen. It went, in essence, as expected as it could. I had to get some Neupogen shots here and there for my white blood cell counts. They were low, but otherwise, I guess it sounds silly to say it, but I was blessed to get through that smoothly. I don't know. Do you say that about chemo? I have no idea. I mean, it still sucked. It was terrible. It was terrible.
No matter what.
But yeah.
You made it through relatively
I made it through
unscathed, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Physically, yes.
Yes, physically. So talk to me about the mental, because I know me personally, I went through a bunch of things still, you know what I mean? So tell me a little bit about what you were thinking, kind of some of the things as you started to process this and some of the mental stuff that you went through.
Well, first and foremost, I had a total hysterectomy at 28. And so I was unable to have children. Now, thankfully for me, I'm a dog person, not a child person. So that at least made it a little bit easier, given the fact that I wasn't someone whose life goal was always to be a mom. So I'm very thankful for that. But as I had mentioned, I was going through a divorce at this point as well. And one of the hardest things for me was thinking, I am damaged goods, like top to bottom, inside and out, mental, physical, you name it. I checked all the boxes for damaged goods. No one will ever want me again. I cannot give someone a child. I have had cancer. I am divorced. I am traumatized. I am not worthy. And oh, that kind of stings to even say that right now because I don't believe that anymore. But I had to work through that. Took years. That took years for me to understand. I mean, even when I met my now husband, we've been married for 10 years now. I did some get him before he gets you, push him away, don't let him get too close, and tried to make him leave multiple times because it was just easier to hurt somebody else before they were able to hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the mental and the emotional side effects, they never go away. They dull, some of them, but they don't ever go away. But also, something that I very distinctly remember is being just completely obsessed with movies about cancer. And My Sister's Keeper, for example, I would watch it and I would just wail and cry on the couch and not want to talk to anyone and just allow myself or force myself, I guess, to be so freaked out by my situation. And I think that was my way of coping and allowing myself to feel it, because throughout my daily life, I made myself just push on. I made myself laugh when I didn't want to. I made myself smile when it didn't feel right. I looked around at my friends that I just thought, I cannot relate to normal people anymore. I can't, why? I mean, I made myself laugh at appropriate times because that's what quote unquote normal people do. And it just felt so false to me. And so I had these moments of watching these movies and just losing my mind over them. And I think that was just my moments of peaking and knowing I can't hold all of this in anymore. So it was my way, it was my outlet. It was my way to get the emotion out and do it by myself and do it in a manner that made me feel, oddly enough, less alone, because the person on the screen was dealing with the same thing. And one of the reasons that I had to do that was because until probably about 6 years ago, I didn't really know that many people that had ovarian cancer. So I was very, very alone in my circumstances. Facebook, I had just joined Facebook like a month before I was diagnosed. All there were really cancer blogs with women saying, oh, we're all going to die from this. It's just everyone's death is going to look different, but we're all going to die from this. And so there was nowhere to go and nowhere to turn. And so although the physical scars healed and I didn't have what I would consider to be a terrible time with chemo, other than the fact that it's freaking chemo and it's just terrible by itself, but it was definitely the emotional side effects that, I don't think they'll ever be completely gone. But the fear of being alone for the rest of my life, the fear of dying alone, the fear of recurrence was and is huge.
What's interesting? I didn't think about this until you shared it, is, the recovery time. I watched a lot of movies,
Mm-hmm.
and people were sending me stuff, Facebook Messenger. I help a lot of people, in my life. And so people are like, oh my God, they're sending me messages.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually watched documentaries on people that had death experiences, to find out what it was like.
Mm.
And I watched this documentary, which was pretty good. It was called Heal. It was really good. And, I'm not like this kind of Bible thumper guy, but I do believe in God, and I am a Christian. I'll say that because I love the stories of Jesus and I believe it. And I literally watched the History Channel's version of the Bible from beginning to end. And I just sat there and I'm like, all this suffering that had occurred in the world, we don't even have that now, but and I started to just I don't know if it was a good thing or something I needed to go through too, but
Sure.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I never thought of that until you said it. I'm like, why? Because I started to hey, I could potentially die. And I got into brain tumor support groups, and I'm blessed by sure. There's a lot of other cases that are super hard. And I had to pull myself out of some of
Yeah.
them because they were like, I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. I'm
Agreed.
now in a couple where I feel like great and helpful. I'm kind of beyond it, behind some of that. And I talked to some guy from a Connecticut brain tumor, and he said, you're going to hear horrific stories. You're never going to be the same. Somebody worked on your brain, which is the CPU, your body, and all this stuff. So I was like going through all that, but I could totally understand because you're like, you don't know where to go and what to do with it. But you have to, like, I always like, let me deal with the worst case scenario and then I'll work backwards.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean?
Because everything else looks better after you've looked at that.
And I don't know about you, but like, I looked at my girlfriend, and she's a nurse, and I was divorced, and my ex-wife and I are good friends. She's a nurse practitioner, and she was like, oh my God, this is super serious. Anybody in healthcare, like, this is super serious, right?
Sure.
But the one thing, I think they had a harder time dealing with it than me. Like, yeah. I had my own struggle and I had to go through it, but I felt like I was like, okay, like they were struggling, but I just couldn't be like I just had to kind of figure life out for a minute. And the one thing that came up for me, and I don't know if you could relate to this, is like, I was like, my life's got to be different. Like, what am I doing? Like, did that come up for you? Like your life, like you kind of look at it?
Oh, well, number one, that's why I went through with divorce. I thought, hey, this is not worth my time anymore. This is about me now. So yeah, it definitely came up for sure. So, but I mean, all joking aside, yes, it did. I didn't want to waste any more time. So I travel, I do what I want when I want. When I met my current husband, one of the first conversations we had, aside from the awkwardness of having to say on date 2, I can't have kids. And I know it's weird I'm telling you this right now, but if you just need to know, because we need to just shake hands and part ways. If like, you just got to have this conversation earlier if you're me. Sure. But I told him early on, I want you in my life, but I also want to do what I want to do. And I don't mean that to sound selfish. I mean that to say that I have catered to other people for my entire life. And I've seen what it's like to face my own mortality. And I need the freedom to do what I want when I want. And either you can be a part of it, or I'll just, I'll do it on my own. So thankfully, he's just the most happy-go-lucky guy I've ever met in my life. So he goes along with my harebrained crazy ideas, and we travel. We go to Europe all the time. We just got back from Spain, and we hike mountains, and we just do things that I would say to some people probably are just as mundane as anything else, but for the normal population, they just wouldn't take the time to do, or they would be afraid to do, or whatever. And certainly I'm still afraid of things, but I don't have time to sit back and say, well, what if I just don't do this thing? I'll be more comfortable this way. I'm going to stay in this box. It's not an option for me at all.
So you just did what you're kind of planning. You just plan things to have experiences.
I don't want things. I want experiences for sure.
That was the one thing I noticed too. Like, somebody asked me, like, literally the day after my diagnosis, I just got discharged. And one of my good friends says, what do you think about? And I don't think about work. I didn't think about, there was nothing any amount of money would have given me. I just sat there and I said, like, what am I doing? Like, what's life look like? And what the two questions, am I doing God's work here? That's what I asked myself. Like, what am I here for? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if that like kind of crossed your mind, but I sat there with that and I'm like, what am I here for? And what, kind of what's next with this? And so go ahead.
I most certainly did that. And for me, it was, and I think with a lot of cancer survivors, they go through this. I need to tell my story. I need to spread awareness. I need to be the face of this disease so that other people don't have to go through what I went through and so on. And when I was diagnosed, it was a little bit of a challenging time to do that, given the fact that social media was nowhere near what it is now. So I didn't have those people to reach out to. And also the organizations and charities that I went to, I couldn't do it. I left after one meeting. It did not work for me. It was very overwhelming and very scary. And it took me a few years, but I found my place with telling my story. And so when I think about what am I doing here, not only is it whatever I want, you know, whatever I want is what I will do, but it's also getting comfortable with talking about what happened to me. Since ovarian cancer is the silent killer, a lot of women, just like me, don't even know they have it before it's too late. I have lost numerous friends, so sharing their stories is very important to me. Not letting their story and their legacy die alongside with their body is very, very important to me. And so I ebb and flow with that, though. I have to be honest. There are times when I'm like, shout it from the rooftops. And there are times when I'm like, I would just want to be normal. I don't want to be the girl that had cancer. And I just go with it. I just go with what feels right at that moment in time. Just kind of honor myself.
That's awesome. Let me ask you a question. And this is one of the things I found is I started asking myself the question, like, what's the learning in this? Like, what has this done that's good? Mm-hmm. So did you ask yourself that question?
Oh, multiple times a day.
So what answers did you come up with?
Well, I think the answers that I came up with led me to my philosophy of not wasting any time. What did I learn from this? Life is freaking short. Yeah. All the cliche things that everybody learns throughout a situation like this, but also I'm worth it. Honor me. And it's okay. And that's not selfish. When I take my final breath, I want to be able to look back at all of the fantastic things I did because I didn't say no and I didn't shy away. But I also learned to say no when yes did not serve me.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Yeah. That is there, I started to think that there's like good that comes out of this, right? Like if I didn't have the experience, I'd probably be grinding hard and not even know, you know what I mean? Sure. Like, hey, let me work, house, live on the lake, whatever, and do all that stuff. And then what, you get sick and you die, right? And we don't realize it until we're there later on. Like this is kind of a normal trajectory.
Yeah.
But one of the things you mentioned it is you felt like you wanted to talk about it. And I know that somebody else that I interviewed on one of the other podcasts, Carly, said the same thing. Like she felt like she needed to talk about it longer than people were willing to hear about it, right? Because it's still, and I think that, and I could relate to that. And so I went through this period too, and I would talk to people, and it was like, listen, I'm a year out October of this whole thing. You know what I mean? A year. It seems long. It's not quite long. And I say to people like, yeah, but I'm not sure what my next 5 years are like. Like, I don't have cancer. I'm followed by an oncologist, a neuro-oncologist. He's from Mandi Anderson. And the term serious as cancer, like he's super nice guy, by the way. You know what I mean? And there's so many question marks, but he's a super amazing guy. And I said, I say that to people that are close to me, and I don't know if it's just a life coping mechanism. They're like, but nobody knows how long they have. Like that's the answer I would get a lot. And it would like kind of like it irritate me.
That's
And I'm
valid.
like, you know, because you're like, yeah, like in reality, you get hit by a car, you could get in a car accident, something drastic could happen. But when you know that there's something in your body or something going on that could potentially shorten your life, it makes the next 1, 2, 3, right? 5 years. They give you what? 5 years and 20%, not like 80%. That's 20.
Correct.
It makes that time compressed.
For sure.
And so, you know,
let's pause here for a second so I can validate your feelings. Because you need to hear from me that the fact that that kind of pissed you off is valid.
Did you hear that too?
Did you? Yes, I heard that. I heard, well, at least you're still alive. I heard it could have been worse. And I heard a lot of stuff. I also heard things like, oh girl, I completely understand it. I had a cyst on my ovary once. I totally get what you're going through. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I understand people want to try and relate to you and they're finding any way to relate to you. But it's okay to say that you don't understand. It's okay to say that you can't relate. It's okay to just keep your mouth shut and sometimes and just hug me instead. You know? So yes, I for sure heard my fair share of things of that nature. I actually, as you're talking, it's fascinating to me because what you're saying, each segment that we're going through reminds me of another chapter of the book that I'm writing, which is just tells me I'm on the right path, I think. But one of the chapters as of right now is called Just Get Over It Already. And I talk about the fact that it's so much easier for other people when you just pretend you've moved on. Because again, I moved on is not a thing for me. No, that's not a thing for me. Carry on is a thing for me. But it's something that makes others around you more comfortable. They don't want to live in your pain. They don't want to live in your grief. They don't know how to handle it. So just get over it already. I was interviewed for a book a few years ago, and the author grew up in France. And we were talking about this concept of how it's just easier for people to move on. And she said in France, they basically have a certain amount of time to grieve a loss. So let's say your spouse dies, for example. They have a certain amount of time in which they wear black, a certain amount of time in which they don't work, a certain amount of time before their grief expiration date hits, and they just have to move on. And she said something to me that it just really hit home. And because I was like, it was hard for me when the flowers stopped coming. It was hard for me when people stopped texting me and stopped checking on me, even though I wanted that. That means I'm getting better. But that was hard for me. Why is that hard for me? And she said, Mandi, because that is the story that people want us to tell ourselves. That when those things stop, you're moving on. Therefore, you're quote unquote normal again, which, no. And you are setting them free from your heaviness. And that was something that was really challenging for me, because there were times when I would be sitting with a group of people and I posted something the other day that's like, hi, I'm Mandi and I'm an oversharer about my cancer story, but I want you to understand why. These are the reasons why. And so I walked through that on social media. And in my book, in this Just Get Over It Already chapter, I talk about a couple of situations in which one thing would lead to another, and I would just start talking about cancer. And someone that I worked with came up to the table in which I was saying something to the extent of, I shouldn't even be here. I should have died a long time ago, yada, yada. And she goes, oh gosh, I walked into this conversation at the wrong time. And then she sat down and I was like, okay. Note to self, if I give you a hat, those hats girls wear at bachelorette parties that say this one came with the fun, this one came with the, the party and the bad decisions or whatever. Your hat says, oh man, what did I say? Something to the extent of can't be trusted with my feelings or something like that. I don't know. But we are, as survivors, oversharers, but there's a reason for that. And I think it's really, really hard for people. It's easier if we just get over it already.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't work that way.
It doesn't. And you feel bad for talking about it. I did after a while, I was just like, the people don't want to hear about it anymore. But
it's almost a compulsive thing. It's healing. It's like your therapy. And it's also, the person who said what she said at this work event, she talks about her dogs all the time or her husband or whatever. How's that any different? This is part of me. This is my life. You are free to talk about your life and the parts of your life that made you who you are. Well, sorry, mine makes you uncomfortable, but this is me. So
I know, because they don't know. I think people don't know how to be with it, and
we remind them of their own mortality.
I know. To their defense, now what I do with people that are going through a hard time, I say it's hard. It can be hard.
Yeah, sure.
It's hard. Because I'll never forget, I went to the brain surgeon. I was at a small hospital and was diagnosed, and I wasn't having surgery there. I went to the chief of neurosurgery, another super amazing guy. He must do tons of these, but he was just he just knew how to react, because obviously he deals with some pretty critical things.
Yeah.
And I literally walked in there like, I was teary at times, and I remember 4 distinct times, and I just said, this is hard. And he's like, I know. This is hard. I know. My girlfriend was there. He goes, Todd, I don't know what it is, but it's got to come out. And I said, and I'll never forget him on the day of surgery. He goes, I'm glad you decided to do this. I'm like, did I have a choice? Right?
Thank you. I don't know.
But he said I was really lucky. And I think I took it in stages, I had to compartmentalize. Let me get through the surgery, moving my extremities, knowing my name. I'll worry about what it is later. Yeah. I went through that. And I said things like, I'm big into the military. And I used to tell myself things like, listen, if these guys could step on IEDs, get shot by snipers, and get treated in field hospitals and do okay, then I could, under better circumstances, do this. That's what I told myself every step of the way.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
But one of the things that I'm learning, we're talking about it, and I'm working on a book and creating this, is it's like a U 2.0, like, it's like Mandi 2.0.
Yeah.
Because it's like you're given a second life.
100%.
You're literally, and, I see it amongst the groups that I'm in. People, I'm like, what's your biggest challenge? What's going on? And it's like, aside from the daily symptoms or whatever it is, they're like, living my new life and dealing with the potential of the what ifs, the combination, you know what I mean? Hey, come back and all that, but the new life and what that's going to look like, because it puts things in a very different perspective.
Yeah, for sure.
So tell me, like, you beat the odds, you're beating the odds as we speak, right? Like, so what did you do to self-care for yourself? Like, I know for me, I'm like, all right, diet's down. Let me look into this. Let me look at this. I looked at like mind-body connection. I looked at all this and said, where's the missing piece? What do I need to do? What's my mindset? Tell me what you like, your pick up the pieces moment. Like, what did that look like?
Yeah. So first off, I did all the basics that most people do after a life altering situation. I reassessed everything. I changed my relationships, as we've already spoken of. So I just reset my entire life. I moved from Dallas to Austin. I took a new job. The job I had prior, I was traveling all the time. And I've said this a million times in the past 13 years as well, but I don't want to live in a Hampton Inn anymore. So I wanted to be at home. I wanted to have a normal life, whatever on earth that even still looks like. By the way, if you know, let me know, because still hadn't found it yet. But I reset everything. I moved. My relationships are different. My job is different. I already ate pretty healthy and I already worked out. So I just upped that a bit and became more educated and aware in what I was putting in my body and on my body, for example. So, but I think a lot of that is certainly not a shock in terms of diet and exercise and things of that nature. But I have to just go back to what we talked about before. What did I do to change everything? It was honor myself. It was to honor what I needed, honor what I wanted, put myself first, I think, for the first time in my life. And it's changed everything. And I have to say, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty confident my life is way better because of what happened to me than it would have been had I not been diagnosed. So that's kind of my long story with that. Another caveat would be that I met my very best friend in the whole world about 5 years ago. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And I had a friend who said, "Hey, I know this girl that was diagnosed. Will you go meet her?" And I'm like, "No, no, it scares me. No, I'm not going to do this." Long story short, I went to meet her and we became sisters immediately. And I watched her embrace her story. I watched her embrace her circumstances and share them with the world and help thousands of women. And although she was 10 years younger than me, I decided to follow in her footsteps. And that's why I'm talking to you right now. Had it not been for Brittany Crosby, I would not be talking to you right now because I was too afraid. It was too, when you say it out loud, it makes it real. And although I would ramble on to my friends and family who didn't want to hear it, I had a hard time speaking publicly about my circumstances. So my turning point for I need to change things and I really need to honor myself and I really need to honor my story and I need to honor others and share my story. I can equate that specifically to Brittany. That progressed 2 years and 3 days ago now when we lost her. She passed away the day after Thanksgiving 2019. And that was another moment of reset for me. And another moment of realization of life is short, do all the things. Say yes when you want to say yes, say no when it does not suit you. Say no when yes does not suit you. She was so good about that and so unapologetically herself. And so it's so funny to say that I was 10 years older than her and she taught me so incredibly much about life. So I've had these little moments of reset that are still happening even 13 years later. These little moments of I've got to change this. These little moments of I could do this better. I could do this more. I could do this, whatever. So, and I can imagine that that's going to continue on.
That's amazing. That's awesome. And I loved your energy on social media. And that's what kind of attracted me to want to have you on this podcast to really kind of share your story. I know that we're coming toward the end. Do you have a little more time or do you have to wrap?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm okay.
Okay, cool. Give me a heads up because, this could just go because I think there's just there's a lot of stuff in here that's just great to unpack.
I am not afraid to talk. So
you're what?
I am not afraid to talk. I'm not shy.
I'm not either. I'm a chatter for sure. So, yeah. And, I could definitely identify with a lot of what you said. And I, that's why I'm doing what I do, because I think the biggest wake up call for me was that I was living like a lot of people live. And it wasn't bad. It wasn't great either. You know
It
what I
just
mean?
was,
It
right?
just was.
Yeah.
And it's so simple it's so easy to get caught in the trap
Yeah.
of it. And one of the things I said to my girlfriend as I was walking around, I had bought a lake house, and this was pre brain tumor. I realized too, because I worked in healthcare and I did this unique role where I helped geriatrics kind of manage their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And one guy said this to me, and he was a CFO of a company, and he developed Parkinson's. And he said, I worked really hard and this crap happened to me. And it hit me. It hit me like a brick.
Yeah.
Then my mom passed away unexpectedly in her sleep at 75. I was like, oh my God. And then COVID happened. This all happened the same year, COVID, and then brain tumor. So I had like these three things, like, I was like, oh my God. Right. So, but after my mom passed, I realized I was like, I'm bringing my vacation to my doorstep.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was diagnosed, I was blessed to be around the lake and thereafter. And people are like, oh, I love your lake. I can't wait until someday I live on the lake. And I'm like, it's not really that hard to do. Like, listen, I'm not this rich guy. I'm not poor by any stretch, but I just found it and I researched it and I did whatever.
Yeah.
But what I said to my girlfriend was this. I said, our lives have to be different when I was diagnosed. And the things that we were like stressed out about when I was going through this, I'm like, this doesn't matter. But the weird thing is when you stabilize, like you get through it, life goes on. Sometimes that habitual stuff comes back. And I'm like, okay, I'm going back to work. I'm doing this. And I'm like, whoa, did that ever happen to you?
Yes. So there was something that you said earlier, and I can't recall what it was now, but I was sitting here thinking, 13 years later, you lose some of that drive to, I don't want to say drive to live, but drive, I'll say drive to live with a capital L. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you do have responsibilities and you do have bills to pay and you have all of these things that normal people have to take care of. So, and to be honest, that's also a blessing within itself that you're moving so far past this trauma that you can one day just think about bills instead of cancer. I don't know. You one day can just think about the job, the trip you have to take for your job instead of dying or whatever. I mean, so the mundane is not a bad thing because to me, the mundane reminds me that I'm here to experience it all. And you know, unless you're a millionaire or unless you're just you live so below your means that you're capable of doing such, most people can't just up and travel 100% of the time. Most people can't just drop what they're doing for the rest of their lives and do what's fun. God bless you if you can. You know, that's amazing, but most people can't. So for me, the way I choose to see it, although the mundane sunk back in a long time ago, and you know, it has to a certain extent, is my job and these mundane things. It's my way to get me to do the thing. It's the vehicle that takes me to do the things I want to do. So it's just a way of resetting your mindset on the mundane to make you and help you realize that A, they're necessary, but also B, they're serving a bigger purpose so that you can do and be and see and whatever it is you need to fulfill whatever the need that the trauma left you with, I guess.
100% agree. 100%, because you can't, and nor do you want to just like honestly, like I went back to work a little earlier than I should have. My doctor's like, oh, maybe take another week. But I was losing I was like, all right, I gotta feel like I'm doing something too somewhat productive.
For sure.
But I'm not like the searching for the directorship job or all that doesn't matter to me. Like, it's more of like, hey, I want to be home. Like you said, because I traveled, I did medical device sales too.
Got it. Okay.
I was in hotels.
So you get it.
I totally get it. And I get to enjoy my dog now. I'm
Love
home
it.
every night. Like,
Love it.
some of the simple things, but really understanding too that life is short. And I love what you said about just experiencing life and do the things that you wanted to do.
For sure.
And I think a lot of people, because I work with clients too, and a lot of people say when the kids get older, when they move out of the house, when they do X, that I think is a hard thing to do. And granted, you have responsibilities with kids, you put your kids through college, you have all that, but just imagine that it's cut short. It may be cut short. How would you live your life different? One of the things that I learned, and it really was in my first hospitalization when I got diagnosed at that small hospital, like the things that mattered most, the two disciplines in the hospital were the people that transported me and the aides, like the PCA, because they sat and talked with me. They're driving me to the test. They're like, how you doing? What's up with this? Like, and I look relatively healthy, right? They're like, what are you in here for? And when people hear your story, they're like, really? Do you know what I mean? But just talking to somebody was that was probably the most important thing for me.
No, I completely agree. And you made a comment that just made me think, sorry, my dog's getting antsy. So if you hear him shaking in the background, I apologize.
That's all
but
good.
This thought of, well, you look healthy. You know where I'm going with this.
I do.
You look healthy. You can't be sick, and so that within itself was an interesting I think concept for me. This thought of I can look a certain way, but the inside of my body is literally dying, and so that I have a lot of friends who have said that they've had conversations with people that have said, again, just not in these words, but why don't just get over it? You don't look sick. And that to me is such an interesting concept, because we've got to remember that we're a whole human. We're more than just what we look like on the outside. And compassion is so incredibly important. So the fact that they took the time to talk to you and they took the time to listen to what you had to say, regardless of what you look like on the outside, is just, it offers such respect. And it gives us the opportunity to share our story in a way that is healing for us, and also maybe healing for the person that's actually willing to sit and hear it also. So it's not just beneficial for our emotional well-being, it's beneficial for the person that holds our hand and just nods as we tell them our story.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me, and I'm big into trauma now. Like, this had brought me to look at trauma deeply, not just the experience that I went through, which was trauma, but I started to look at, because my diet was dialed in. I was always pretty healthy, right? I took care of that side, but I could see where I was like, wow, I lived a life of stress. My younger years were challenging. And, and I sought help at an early age when I was younger, but I had a lot of PTSD, and I started to dive into this and the effects that it has on the body. Now, what's your take on on the trauma? Because you mentioned it a couple times, and I think the experience for sure is a huge trauma that goes forward. Tell me a little bit more about that from your perspective.
So in terms of the trauma, I feel it physically now. I definitely and most certainly still have moments when I feel it emotionally, hands down. No bones about it. That won't go away. But I think I've internalized a lot of my trauma, and I feel it in physical pain now. So I've got a lot of muscle pain. I've got a lot of joint pain. And to be completely transparent and fair, I am making an assumption, right? Because what would I be had I not gone through what I went through? I don't know, maybe the same leg would hurt. Maybe my hip would still hurt. I have no idea. But my assumption is because of my personality, house my trauma physically 13 years later. Earlier on, I would have bouts of sitting in my apartment, not wanting to speak to anyone for a week. Trauma, PTSD would significantly increase the week before my follow-up appointments, my oncology appointments. I wouldn't want to talk to anyone. I wouldn't want to see anyone. It was just too overwhelming. I would release my trauma with the sad movies and so on and so forth. It was a lot more emotional for years. And I don't know if it's good or bad. And I am also just getting older. I'm 41 now, but my body hurts. And I do think that it is that internalization of the emotional and mental pain that I have just pushed through and am still working on pushing through.
Yeah. That was my whole life, pushing through.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny. And this is for listeners. And I think I'm going to do a series of podcasts on this because I really dove into it. I listened to some podcasts because I'm a huge podcast fan. And I was listening to a podcast by Jocko Willink, who I like. He's a Navy SEAL. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
No.
He wrote the book Extreme Ownership. Just an amazing guy. Listen to him. So his interviews go for 3 hours, by the way. But I'm like glued to that.
It's a good 3 hours.
He actually interviewed this guy. His name is Mike Day. And my goal in life is to get him on a podcast. And I'm going to send him a message for sure. And he's a Navy SEAL, and he was shot like 27 times, and he lived in Iraq. But the bigger part of the story wasn't that part that got me. He wrote a book called Perfectly Wounded. He lived through it, but he grew up with so much trauma. Like he was abused as a kid, and how he transformed it. But he mentioned, the reason I bring this story, he mentioned this book that really transformed him, and it's called The Body Keeps the Score. And it really goes into a lot of research around trauma. And I really started to look at this, and I'm like, oh my God, and ways to kind of help with trauma. So I encourage a lot of listeners, if you're dealing with PTSD or any types of trauma, me personally, I'm not a big label guy because it's a double-edged sword, because I realized I finally put a label on it when I got this with the brain, because the label made me feel like, okay, I'm not alone, but I had drive to get better. If that makes sense. Like, sure. I pushed through. I didn't say to myself, oh my God, this is my thing, and just kind of crawled up in a ball, And so I love what you shared about that you watch sad movies, like the things that you did to kind of cope with that,
Yeah, absolutely.
What would you say to somebody that is going through a traumatic experience, or that had gone through a traumatic experience? What kind of words of wisdom would you give them?
It's okay to feel what you feel. It's okay to something my mom told me. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be emotional about this. It's okay to feel what you feel. Just don't live there. Don't stay there. And if you do, seek out help. It is okay to seek out help. And so that is the most important thing. And I'll circle back around to my theme for this whole conversation: honor thyself. Honor thyself. That is so important. But also feel what you feel. And seek out your people. Find those people that make you feel okay, that can relate, that can understand, that can listen, that can make you feel less alone. And lean on them when you need to, and step away when you need to. Honor thyself in every capacity you can.
Honor thyself. That is awesome. So the other thing that I wanted to ask you is, you've been mentioning this book. So let's give you a plug for the book for sure.
Okay.
So tell me a little bit about the book, when it's going to be available, And when it is, if you'll do a part two.
Oh,
Part
100%
two
I will.
on the book.
100%. Yes. So my book is, I've got one chapter left in essence in my first rough draft. So I am still working on the very, very first version of it. And I have to be transparent. The last chapter has been the hardest for me because it is about Brittany, about my friend that passed away. And I'm dealing with a little bit of avoidance here in terms of writing it, but I have committed to getting this done. So the first draft, I have committed to finishing this month. And then I have some critique buddies that I'm going to send it off to, and that'll take X amount of time. I don't know, for them to give me those edits. Once I get those edits back, I'm going to start attempting to send out my query letter and send out my proposal to agents and see if anyone takes a bite. So after that, it's anybody's guess. So I have to say the hard work has not even begun yet. The first draft is almost finished, but after that, that's when it really starts. So cross your fingers. I don't know. The sky's the limit, and we'll just ride this wave as long as it takes, but I'm committed. I mean, self-publishing certainly is always an option. So the time frame is TBD, but I will by all means keep you posted, and everyone just say a prayer and cross your fingers for me. It's a huge goal I have, that's for sure.
And we'll have your contact information in the show notes of how to reach you for sure, for anybody that's, looking to for some inspiration, some help, or any guidance on there.
Absolutely.
And before we leave, and before we end the show, I'd love to ask you a question about what was the one thing or a couple things that you felt led to you living this life on purpose, and you being here today and beating the odds?
Well, oddly enough, you just said the answer for me. Brittany's tagline, and we all have shirts that say "Live life on purpose." We could end with that. I mean, it was the relationships I made along the way. It was my relationship with her. It was learning from her. It was opening myself up to opportunities, honoring thyself, of course, but honoring the fear, listening to the fear, but not letting it take hold. Just doing the thing, whatever the thing was. But she taught me how to live life on purpose. Watching her go through what she went through and still having that beautiful smile on her face all the time, I just thought, man, what do I have to be angry about? So I let it go. Even after I lost her, I let it go. I can't. It's not worth my time.
Holding on to it.
Yeah. It's detrimental, right? A, it's a waste of time. B, it's detrimental to my health, both mental and physical.
Yeah. That's amazing. It has been a joy and an honor to have you on, to hear your story. We went a while, but I thought it was well worth it for sure.
Oh, sure.
And
absolutely.
So stay tuned there'll be a part 2. This is an accountability piece for the book to be out, right?
Okay.
And we will sign off. And